from the Media Broadcasting Center.
The Real Deal, where I'm very pleased to have as my special featured guest during this second hour, which will be hosted by Gary King, John Hankey, who has a variety of things to say. Gary, why don't you introduce our show for the new JFK program?
All right, yeah. I would like to announce to everyone that this is the anniversary show, and we have a special guest. We have been at this for 2 years now. This is show number 104, and we're happy to have John Hankey, but we've got some really, really big news, and Larry's going to tell us about that. We have Jim Mars joining the OIC, coming on over to our side. So, Larry, tell us all about that one.
Okay, hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Good evening, everybody. Last week we had Jim Mars, the author of Crossfire, the plot to kill John F. Kennedy, and which part of JFK, the movie by Oliver Stone, was based. Okay, and now that we mentioned JFK, the movie, I just wanted to add, sort of to finish, what we were talking about last week about Mark Lane, because we didn't have a chance. We sort of rushed into the end. But the move Executive Action, before there was any JFK, there was executive action, and I believe in 1971 or 72, Jim, maybe you might want to correct me on that. But, you had major stars like Burt Lancaster and Robert Ryan, and a cast of older type of actors, sort of like what happens in JFK, where he's got Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, participating in that movie, sort of like at the end of their careers, Jim. And maybe, given that they were at the end of their careers, they were not as afraid to interpret a role of an actor, who might have been involved in the JFK assassination. I find that very interesting.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, you need to unmic, Jim. Unmute.
Executive Action was a completely brilliant piece of work about the Dallas roots of the assassination. Oliver Stone focuses on New Orleans, Jim Garrison, Clay Shaw, Lee Oswald. But this was really about the Murchisons and the other powerful oilmen in Dallas wanting to get rid of JFK. Largely because he was threatening to cut the oil depletion allowance, and because they wanted to get Lyndon, their boy, into office, preferring his policies to those of JFK. So the two films are highly complementary, Larry.
Yeah, one of the since we were talking about Mark Lane, I don't know, not very many people know that he was the major consultant to that movie. Okay, so when we see Executive Action, a lot of that storyline actually was brought out by Mark Lane.
I forgot about that. I forgot all about that Mark Lane was involved with that.
And I just wanted to finish real quickly, I love to watch that movie, every now and then, and I noticed that he had motorcycle cops driving up the embankment on their motorcycles.
Brilliant.
There you go. So
he might have had this, much, more better interpreted than what we've been led to believe.
Larry, when you went to see Executive Action, they gave you a little newspaper. It was the equivalent of about 8 pages that had documentation and substantiation for every claim that was made in the film. Yeah. Excellent movie, Jim. I have it. It's part of my DVD collection, and it's, treasured. Trust me.
I agree completely. I tell you what, there's few people that have used Mark Lane's books as much as John Hankey. So, John, talk to us a little bit about Mark Lane and how he's influenced you. And I do want to make this point. In the world of JFK, no one has more video views than John Hankey's. We're talking in the millions. Webster Tarpley's got it on his website. So when it comes to the king of JFK videos, no one tops John Hankey. So welcome to the show, John Hankey.
Thank you so much, Gary.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little bit about Mark Lane.
Yeah, sure. I've spent years looking for the Bush, the Hoover memo, the memo that Hoover wrote 5 days after the assassination about the meeting that Hoover says took place the day after the assassination with Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency. I'd heard a radio program where somebody mentioned it, and I spent years looking for it. The guy said it was on the Nation magazine, and I went to the library, and I'm looking through all these back issues, and I couldn't find it. And you'll find, in fact, that the libraries are wired to make it difficult for you to find stuff like that. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. The point is that the first place I got my hands on it was in Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment. And, it's a really, really a brilliant, well, from my point of view, particularly a brilliant book in terms of nailing E. Howard Hunt. And when you then look at Hunt's connections to George H.W. Bush, you drag Bush in 4 or 5 different ways. In addition to the Hoover memo, you have 4 or 5 other connections of Bush to the assassination. So Mark Lane provided all of that. Mark Lane's the guy who released the Zapruder film, and for all of its weaknesses, right, for the manipulations of the serious and important manipulations of the Zapruder film, nevertheless, I was this idiot, do walking down the street. I was a very good student, quote unquote, right? I mean, I was good at following orders, and I had my head so far up my behind, I didn't know whether it was night or noon, and I saw the Zapruder film, and you could hear the pop. It was audible as my head popped out from my backside, and I realized how ignorant I was, right? If the Zapruder film was not reliable in terms of showing the limousine stop, if it wasn't reliable in showing the very, 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 very deep involvement and central involvement of the Secret Service in the assassination, it did help you get your head out of your backside in terms of understanding that everything you had been told was a lie, and you needed to re-educate yourself, and not just on the Kennedy assassination, but on every single historical event that is of any significance. The chances are better than good that you don't know anything.
And of course, you're primarily alluding to the fact that you see JFK had moved violently back and to the left, which is obviously indicative of a shot from the front or from the right front, which is inconsistent with all the shots having been fired from behind, which you'd been told by the Warren Commission.
And accepted, right? I mean, my family were devotees of John Kennedy. We had all these Life magazines. I had an LP of Kennedy's speeches before he was assassinated, right? My father came home when Kennedy was running for election with all these pins, and his kids were running around with big JFK pins. And I accepted everything that the Warren Commission had to say until I saw the Zapruder film, and now I was on my way. And we owe it to Mark Lane that we got our hands on the Zapruder film, right? He's the guy who took it from Garrison and duplicated it and spread it around and told the people that he gave it to make as many copies as they could. And I bumped into one of those in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's hard to measure. It's hard to measure Mark Lane's achievements. Just like before, I'd forgotten all about the movie that Larry is talking about. It's just amazing. So, all right, now, Mr. Hankey, we want you to talk a little bit about the recent thing going on at the Inquirer. We're talking about Ted Cruz being in New Orleans.
No, and, his father, Raphael.
Father, I'm sorry about that. And also at Sitka, they completely reject any of this whatsoever, that Raphael Cruz had anything to do, and this is as much hogwash as could possibly be.
So, Jeff, let's look at the first slide. John, were you aware that Sitka rejects the idea that Raphael Cruz was in New Orleans? I mean, this is stunning.
I don't pay any attention to Sitka, and it's my suggestion. I discussed with Gary that I wanted to do the Gary King stuff, and then as quickly as we possibly can, and then come back. I think that this question of Raphael Cruz is really, really important. And is everybody agreeable to that?
Well, no, it's already up in terms of the slide set, John. Let's start here with this. Yeah.
Well, except I want to go into some detail and depth on this particular topic. And
that's fine. Go.
Okay, fine. Okay, good. I think that one of the points I want to make is the importance of collegiality, and that it's so desperately, a college is where you get together with other serious researchers and students. The professors are supposed to be students, and you argue with each other. You put your ideas up in the audience that your colleagues are supposed to argue with you. They're supposed to help you find the flaws in your argument and the flaws in your evidence. And in doing that, they help you hone your argument and hone your evidence, and very, very likely will help you to conclusions that you hadn't seen on your own. For example, Judith Baker raises the issue that Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't a bad guy, right? Lee Harvey Oswald was a hero. And if Lee Harvey Oswald was leafleting and Ted Cruz's father was helping him, that doesn't indicate that Ted Cruz's father was involved in the assassination. It indicates that he was involved with Oswald. But I think there's some very, very, really important distinctions to be made. And I hadn't thought about any of those subtleties until Judith raised that issue. And then I started thinking about it. And feel free to interrupt me at any point, but it's my observation that there were CIA anti-Castro thugs on the street where Oswald was leafleting.
Sure. Shall we look at the next slide?
If you like. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think that Michael Payne was one of those operatives there.
Yeah, on the far left. And
but
Chauncey is cut out here on the right, of course.
My understanding is that the one person in that slide who is not identified is the guy who looks like Rafael Cruz.
That's right.
The rest of them have been identified as CIA asset anti-Castro Cubans. Am I mistaken about that? That's
basically correct. And of course, Oswald was being sheep dipped and given such a persona himself in order to be nailed as the patsy in Dallas.
Well, also we have Chauncey Holt there, Jim. That we have.
Of course.
Well, but Chauncey Holt was involved in the assassination.
Of course, he's identified everyone here as having been a part of Operation Mongoose.
There you go. He has.
Let's not forget that Jim Garrison said, and it's one of the biggest impressions he ever made on me, that every single person that he investigated that had anything to do with Lee Oswald was involved with the Central Intelligence Agency. Every single one. So almost by default, right there, we already know it's nothing but CIA surrounding him now. And
but
that's just an amazing coincidence, Gary.
Yeah. Who's the guy in the middle? Oh, we couldn't figure that one out.
Okay.
If it cracks like a duck, huh?
If he quacks like a duck, we might have a duck.
But
go, John.
Thank you. Judith draws the distinction that Oswald was CIA connected and Oswald was not involved in the assassination. Right? Not everybody who's involved in the CIA is dirty. But I think it's fairly safe to say that everybody who was involved in Operation Mongoose was dirty. And most of them, if not all of them, were in Dallas, right? I mean, Chauncey Holt is far from the from Operation Mongoose were in Dallas that day and, in fact, in Dealey Plaza, right? But Oswald was not involved in the assassination. Oswald was one of the good guys, CIA connected, but one of the good guys. Go ahead.
Well, a lot of us, Larry, go ahead.
No, if I may, I just wanted to mention that if anything, Judith is very clear in establishing that Lee was part of an abort team.
That's right.
Okay, so go ahead. You can continue.
Well, right, but he was, right, you have CIA people who are part of an abort team who are genuinely part of an abort team. Right. You have CIA people, I think, who are nominally part of an abort team, but in fact are involved in the assassination. But they are identified as being part of an abort team in case they get their picture taken standing in front of the school book depository and somebody says, "What the hell are you doing standing in front of the school book depository?" They can say, "I'm part of an abort team." If they get photographed anywhere, they can say, "Oh, I was part of an abort team." And I think that Oswald was, well, Judith knows what she knows, and I don't think that she knows particularly what Oswald's involvement was. But so in any case, but it was her comments that made me take a step back. And I took a big step back and I said, well, wait a minute. Oswald's mama said she thought he was FBI. His best friend at I think it's the Riley Coffee Company, but it could be a different employer, said that he thought he was FBI. If I'm not mistaken, the guy who ran the garage at the Riley Coffee Company, it was the guy who ran the garage, but I'm not sure of which employer it was, said that he saw Oswald meeting with guys who were driving a car. He thought the guys were FBI. When he checked their paperwork, it said that they were Secret Service. Well, I think that they were deep FBI who were using the cover that they were Secret Service, because the Secret Service, if Oswald was meeting with Secret Service guys, that doesn't make him look innocent. That makes him look guilty. I think he was meeting with FBI guys, and that the cover was so deep that the garage attendant looked at the guys and said FBI, but he looked at the paperwork and it said Secret Service. Well, never mind. So the step that I want people to take is, if Oswald was, and Wagner Carr, right, the Attorney General of the state of Texas calls up the Warren Commission the first day that they're meeting and says, Oswald is an FBI agent, employee number S179. He's getting paid $200 a month. I think it took me 30 years to look at that information for the 7,000th time and say, he had his paycheck and stub in the guy in his hand.
Which is why we can't get the W-2 forms for the alleged assassin of the 35th president.
Right.
Because all the government couldn't put its hands on them.
53 years later, how many years later are we?
How absurd can you get?
Well, we can get as absurd as you want. Anyway, the point is, I think I am willing to say with confidence that Oswald was working for the FBI. He wasn't working for the FBI passing out those leaflets so that, right, in his ears, in his mind, he's not passing out leaflets so that he can be set up as the assassin of JFK. What is the story that he thinks that he's doing? And so you take another big step back. What was the FBI doing? What was the most important thing that the FBI was doing? And I'll run you through my answer. It'll take me a minute and a half, and then you can argue with me if you care to. The Cuban Missile Crisis, I think people would probably agree, was the biggest red shooting star on John Kennedy's agenda. It's the biggest mistake he ever made in his life, letting that come to pass. And when it was over, he and Khrushchev said, well, what the hell happened? How did we get to this point? Because neither one of them wanted to be, with their fingers on the trigger and the world in the balance. How did that happen? And Khrushchev said, well, you guys were carrying out terrorist raids against Cuba and you were preparing to invade. And Kennedy said, what? What do you mean we were preparing to invade? And that's a little difficult to swallow, but I'm telling you, there's a U.S. government document called Operation Zapata. Prouty. Fletcher Prouty goes on and on about this particular document. It's difficult to get your hands on. I apologize for not having posted it myself. But in that document, it says that the CIA proposed the invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, and Kennedy said no D-Day style invasion. All right, it's about 5 lines, his response to that proposal, and then they launched a D-Day style invasion. So my point is that the CIA paid absolutely no attention to what Kennedy had to say about Cuba. They launched the D-Day style invasion, and they continued to carry out these raids against his orders, and they continued to run these training camps preparing for an invasion of Cuba right up to the day that Kennedy was assassinated. And in solving and resolving the missile crisis, Kennedy promised Khrushchev that he would stop the terrorist raids, and he promised that he would stop the training for an invasion, and it didn't happen. And Castro called up Khrushchev, screaming at Khrushchev, saying, hey, they're still doing it. And Khrushchev called up Kennedy, screaming, hey, they're still doing it. And Kennedy called in Hoover and said, get them.
Yeah, he's talking about Lake Pontchartrain camps, the training camps. Lake Pontchartrain.
Correct. And so how did Hoover find out about the Lake Pontchartrain camps? I think it's more than obvious. There's pictures of Sturgis and Oswald at the Pontchartrain camps. How much more evidence do you need to come to the conclusion that Hoover sent Oswald to locate the Pontchartrain camp? Oswald located them, and they got shut down as a result of Oswald's work on behalf of the FBI. The question is, how did Oswald locate them? And this is surmise on my part, but I think you'll find it appealing. In any case, you'll find that it completely accords with the evidence, right? It perfectly meshes with the evidence. I think that Hoover called up his old friend Guy Bannister, who used to be the head of the FBI office in Chicago, and said, I'm sheep dipping this guy. We're trying to infiltrate the Fair Play for Cuba committee. Give him a hand. And Bannister says, yeah, all right. And they send Oswald down there. Bannister sets him up. There's no argument about that. Bannister set him up, gave him an office in the same building, gave him all the secretarial privileges that he needed, anything Oswald needed. Bannister's secretary was at his disposal to print the stuff up, make the copies, hand it to him. And provide any other assistance and help that he needed. In this process of doing that, Oswald rekindled his old relationship with David Ferrie, who was a senior staffer at the Pontchartrain camp. He wheedled his way into Pontchartrain. He had to go to gay orgies with David Ferrie at Clay Shaw's house to do it. But in the process, he wheedled his way in. He got his butt to Lake Pontchartrain. He got himself photographed, I don't think on purpose. And the FBI swooped in and shut them down. Now, well, I should say, go ahead, argue with that, anybody who wants to. But
I think you're being overly bifurcating. I mean, Oswald was recruited as a Marine Corps by the Office of Naval Intelligence. He was stationed at Sugi. He was on a mission for the CIA with his pseudo defection to the Soviet Union. When he returned, he was still working with, on multiple tracks. It's absolutely correct that he was an informant for the FBI. But here in New Orleans, I mean, look, you're surrounded by CIA operatives here, and Lee was one of them. And when you say he wasn't involved in the assassination, I think that's a very curious way to put it, John, because clearly he was on the fringe. He was intended to figure out what was going on and do what he could to thwart it. That would be my most charitable interpretation of Lee's role here. And, of course, he wound up being hung out to dry.
My interpretation is this one, and hats off to Webster Tarpley. And, like I'm saying, I really believe in the importance of having colleagues and carrying on discussions with people who are fierce researchers and who are fierce defenders of their position. Webster Tarpley says that Mohammed Atta was involved in able danger, and everybody saw that, right? Mohammed Atta, for the people in the audience who don't know, is supposedly the lead of the 9/11 attacks. Now, obviously, that's anybody who knows anything about the 9/11 attacks can see that that's patently false. But so what was he doing? Well, he was involved in able danger, and the Republicans in the Congress were saying, look, we have all of this evidence that Mohammed Atta was involved in this U.S. government program, able danger. What the hell was going on? Dead silence. And, it went on silent, the response from the administration, until people stopped asking the question and they swept it under the carpet the best they could. And Tarpley says that able danger was the B team. In intelligence parlance, it's the B team. In football parlance, it's the red shirts. And let's talk football. In red shirts, you have these guys who you call in, and they put on red shirts, and then they study and run the offense of the team you're going to be playing against next week, so that you can practice against it.
John, look, the JFK is complicated enough, much less compounding it with 9/11. Let's return to the scenario.
Absolutely.
If I read you right, your nuanced approach is to imply that Rafael Cruz, although captured in this photograph, was not necessarily a bad guy. That seems to me what you're seeking to establish here.
Well, I'm more interested at the moment in talking about Oswald and Oswald's role. I think that when the CIA discovered that it was Oswald who had done what Kennedy and the FBI had failed to do for 3 years, which is locate Pontchartrain and shut it down, when they figured out it was him, they sent what's his name? Who was Oswald's supervisor in the CIA? David Atlee Phillips. David Atlee Phillips went to Oswald and said, look, we want you to run B-team operations. You're going to run them in Dallas. You're going to meet with Jack Ruby, right? There's all this evidence that Oswald was meeting. And there's at least two very, very, very solid pieces of evidence that Oswald was working, cooperating with Ruby in the couple of weeks before the assassination. I think they told him, you're gonna plot as loudly and publicly as you can to assassinate the president. We'll see if the Secret Service can pick it up. We'll see if the FBI can pick it up. Mm-hmm. And then it does it so neatly. You see, I've never thought that the Miami operation to assassinate Kennedy, it was paper thin. It never seemed to me that it was authentic. Same thing in Chicago. It never seemed to me that it was authentic. And what I think they did, because look, here's the huge problem that this explains, which is how do you explain that Hoover wrote a memo saying there's going to be an attempt on the president's life in Dallas on November 22nd, and Kennedy went to went to Dallas on November 22nd. And I think the Secret Service went to Kennedy and said, look, we busted the guys in Chicago. We busted the guys in Miami. The guys in Dallas are our guys. Don't worry about it. We got a handle on this. Hoover is reporting to you what he's heard, but the people the noise from are our people. You don't need to worry. Go on down to Dallas. I think that's how they got Kennedy to ignore Hoover's warning.
Sorting out where I agree and disagree with what you've been describing here would be a rather arduous undertaking. Let me just say,
sure.
Are you implying that the Inquirer had the article wrong, that Donald Trump was mistaken in saying they should be following it up? Have you seen any of our programs on this before? Because we've done quite a bit on this very topic right here on this show.
Yes, I have. But so what you're saying, what I hear you saying is let's get back to Rafael Cruz.
Yeah,
let's do that.
Sure.
Let's get back to Rafael Cruz. And what I have to say about Rafael Cruz, given what I believe that Oswald was a member of a B team. I think that Ruby was a member of a B team. Maybe we can set that aside and focus on Rafael Cruz. And my insight on Rafael Cruz is Sylvia Odio. And let me take a step back again and say, look, the Sylvia Odio's father was anti-Castro, but he was not pro-mafia. He was anti-Castro, but he was fiercely anti-Batista. And in being fiercely and he was also very pro-land reform, and he was pro-democracy. And in being all of those, he was at fierce odds with the fascists in the CIA. He was not a friend of the fascists in the CIA. He was a good friend of Kennedy, and the Kennedys were trying to promote Odio. And I think that that's why the fascists in the CIA took Lee Harvey Oswald to Sylvia Odio's door in order to link her to Oswald, who was then linked to the assassination, in an attempt to link Odio to Oswald, the assassination. You will recall, of course, that there was a plan, and we're sort of, I think all of us, cloudy on how this fits into the big picture. But somebody high-ranking in the CIA forged audio tapes of somebody who was not Oswald supposedly being in Mexico City and talking to a high-ranking assassination supervisor at the Russian embassy. And the morning after the assassination, the head of McComb calls up Johnson and says, the Russians planned this stuff. And
John, we even have photographed, of Rafael Cruz on Main Street in Dallas standing beside Antonio Veciana.
Set that aside.
Wait a minute.
All right,
What do you mean set that aside? We got this guy on one hand down in New Orleans handing out leaflets with Lee Oswald. Then he's on Houston on the day JFK is being whacked with Antonio Veciana, who was the founder of Alpha 66. And you're telling me, is this your position, that he had nothing to do with the assassination?
On Main Street.
Nothing to do with the assassination. He's saying that it was Cruz there.
No, I'm not saying that it was Cruz in Dallas.
No, in New Orleans.
In New Orleans, that photo looks like Cruz.
Right. But you were saying that even without the photo, there was plenty of reason for him to be there.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you, Gary, very, very much. What I'm saying is that Rafael Cruz, like Sylvia Odio's father, was against Batista. Rafael Cruz left Cuba when Batista was in power. He was not he was subject to being accused of being pro-Castro. Because he left Cuba before Castro came to power, he was clearly anti-Batista, and he was subject to a threat from the CIA. You're pro-Castro, and not only, if you're lucky, we're going to deport you, because otherwise we're throwing your butt in jail.
John, we know that Rafael Cruz was in New Orleans in 1963.
Yes,
we know he
right.
was an anti-Castro Cuban. He appears to have been there. We have multiple photo confirmations. Judith Baker met him when she was collaborating with Lee in the development of the rapid-acting polio vaccine. So she's confirmed his presence too.
Oh.
And then we have what I regard as, a clear photograph. It's such a famous photograph. I actually put it on the cover of Assassination Science when I published my first collection of expert studies in 1998. with no idea that it happened to include a photograph of Rafael Cruz standing beside Antonio Venciana. So, I mean, I'm just very puzzled, in a predicament about what you are attempting to tell us about Rafael.
Well, let me say this. I don't know, okay? I'm merely making the observation. I'm merely trying to invoke the subtlety that the path that I was set on by Judith Baker, that we should appreciate the fact that the being connected to these guys, as Oswald was, doesn't mean that you were on their side. Now, hang on, let me say this because I think it's interesting. This is at the time that Oswald is leafleting, I believe, certainly very, very near that time, Lansdale is writing Operation Northwoods. Lansdale is the CIA case officer for Cuba, and he's writing Operation Northwoods saying we should be setting off bombs and then blaming it on Cuban nationals in the country.
Yeah, shooting down airliners and
well, yes, that's right. But let's get back to Rafael Cruz. If we set off bombs in the United States and blame it on Cuban nationals, I can name one, Rafael Cruz. We'll sweep his ass up and we'll say he did it. And look, he's clearly pro-Castro because he left before Castro came to power. He's a Castro operative in the country. And look, he's connected to Lee Harvey Oswald. They've set him up. Look, we have pictures of him passing out Fair Play for Cuba photographs. Now, I don't know, but it strikes me that there's that possibility. And look, when the CIA has cards in their hand, you don't know how they're going to play them, and they don't know how they're going to play them. We have all of these operatives, and okay, we're going to play this guy in this situation, and we're going to play that guy, and we're going to set up this patsy here, and we're going to set up that patsy there. And Rafael Cruz was a sitting duck to be set up to be blamed for a bombing that had been carried out by the CIA with the...
Was he blamed for a bombing that was set off by the CIA, John?
Was he? There were no bombings that I'm aware of.
So you're talking about a hypothetical. There are
Absolutely.
dozens of different imaginary stories we could weave, like the one you're weaving here.
Okay.
It does not seem to me to advance our understanding of Rafael Cruz or what he was doing in New Orleans with Lee Oswald and what he was doing in Dallas with Antonio Venciana.
Well, if I may, I just wanted to mention a couple of things about Rafael Cruz that we have discussed here for a while here. And first of all, his exit out of Cuba and where he ended up at the University of Texas, obtaining very prestigious degrees, in mathematics and computer science, which at the time were very high echelon curriculums, Jim. And then him disappearing all of a sudden after the assassination to Calgary. And all of this adds up to something that just doesn't smell right.
And going to work for Zapata.
Yeah, no, and for what's the name of the outfit in Texas, the big oil company?
Halliburton?
Yeah, Halliburton, yeah, exactly.
He worked for Halliburton.
Yes.
But after the assassination, he hightailed it out to Canada and became a Canadian citizen.
Right, and the reason is because he had already registered for the selective service, and then he said, I'm out of here, because he didn't want to go to Vietnam.
Well, that's an excuse. That makes sense. Well, except that
Jim Garrison hot on his tail.
But he had the CIA to defend him.
Yeah. John, last week we've consumed more than half of the time featuring you here, and we want to hear your views about Gary Webb.
Sure, let's do that.
Let's go to slide number 4, please, Chance.
Okay, very good. And as anybody who's listening will have noted, Jim and I butt heads all the time. And we don't agree about LBJ's involvement in the assassination, and we don't agree about Kennedy's womanizing. And Jim,
I don't know. Do we have any different? Jack did a lot of womanizing, John. I'm not sure we're in opposite ends on that.
We are. I don't believe that he did. But hang on. And do Eugenio and I agree that LBJ wasn't involved? And do Eugenio and I agree that that JFK didn't do a bunch of womanizing? But my point is that being a colleague doesn't mean that you agree with people. That's not what being a colleague means. Being a colleague means you respect each other, you listen to each other. It means that you shut up and listen while the other guy is criticizing you. You give the other guy time and space to criticize, and all of this is based on your mutual effort, your mutual desire to find the truth. You're not defending your position because it's your position. You are involved in this really, really, really difficult struggle to find the truth. And you have the deepest respect for people who are involved in that similar struggle, whether or not they agree with you. And
well, John, I'm sorry to say I'm convinced that 90% of the JFK research community is working the other side of the street.
Well, it doesn't matter.
I'm not at all sympathetic to those I have identified as working to promote disinformation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Go ahead.
And Jim DiEugenio is prime among them, in case you have any doubts about it.
He's not a colleague, and that's what my presentation tonight is. The point of my presentation tonight is that DiEugenio is not a colleague. He's a scumbag.
Well, very good.
I had some very choice words for him that I don't think they wouldn't be professional, but I think we're ready to go to the next slide. I'm ready to go to the next slide. I'm not particular. I don't want to spend more time than necessary talking about DiEugenio.
Go. Keep going.
Okay, good. Well, the next slide is dangerous words. This is David Denby. He's the premier movie reviewer at the New Yorker magazine, which is, they would appreciate me saying, the premier literary magazine in the United States, and has been for 50 years at least, and maybe 80 years, the premier. And so they think a lot of themselves, and they think a lot of their movie reviews, and they think a lot of their movie reviewers. And the Kill the Messenger movie about Gary Webb, if Denby reviewed it, that shows that they had a lot of respect for this movie. It shows, particular involvement. And next slide, please. You see down at the bottom, it says, even his skeptics would have to admit that he must have been a very strong-willed man to shoot himself in the head twice.
It is a remarkable feat. I'm reminded of Henry Marshall, who shot himself 5 times with a single-shot bolt-action rifle, hit himself on the head to render himself unconscious, and had lungs filled with carbon monoxide, but was pronounced to be a suicide.
Mac Wallace.
Yeah, Mac Wallace.
But I want you to notice a couple of things. The New Yorker is literary, so this is ironic. This statement, the New Yorker is not going to say what we will see a reviewer in a minute say, which is what the hell you mean he shot himself in the head twice? How did he get off that second shot? I'd like to know that. And Gary Webb was using a police special, and I had an expert in firearms tell me that if you stick a police special to your head and pull the trigger, the explosion is going to kill you before the bullet does. A police special is made to be such a powerful weapon that if you wound a suspect, it will knock them to the ground. Because suspects were killing, they would be mortally wounded by the police, but before they died, they'd get off a fatal shot at the pursuing officers. And they wanted something so that when the officer shot this guy, he went down, whether he was wounded or not, but particularly if he was mortally wounded, put him down so he stopped shooting at us. And so, this is a very, very powerful weapon, and you can't shoot yourself in the head twice. But so 2 things I want to notice, and let's move on because we've got some stuff to cover. Dangerous words. Dangerous? Where's the danger? You mean, is Denby trying to say that if a reporter writes the things about the CIA, that's dangerous because they might commit suicide? That doesn't, to me, that doesn't make any sense. He's not saying it's dangerous because you might commit suicide. He's saying it's dangerous because you might find yourself being so strong-willed that you can't face the world, you can't face life anymore, but you can't shoot yourself in the head twice. If you're strong-willed, you're not going to commit suicide because you're strong-willed, right? But so my point is that I think that the New Yorker reviewer is being ironic and is saying, look, Gary Webb lived a dangerous life, and it was dangerous because the CIA wanted him dead and they killed him. That's what was dangerous about it. If that isn't what he's saying, then what was he saying was dangerous? But let's go on to the next slide if nobody has any objections. So this is the Los Angeles Times. And again, next slide. This is Kenneth Turan, who is the premier. He's the senior reviewer at the Los Angeles Times. He reviews the movies that he wants to review, and he doesn't.
No chance. Go back one.
No, that's it. Oh no, you're right. It doesn't matter.
Go back, chance number 8.
Okay, fine. That's fine. But it's really interesting. I think it just tickles me that this guy is writing for the Los Angeles Times. And if you look at the highlight, it says that the Los Angeles Times attempted to discredit Webb's reporting. And then it quotes the movie saying you get the most flack when you're right about the target. So what is this reviewer saying? He's saying the LA Times tried to discredit Webb, and it's saying that Webb was right. This guy is sticking a knife in the editors at the LA Times saying, you guys attacked Webb and he was right. And then next slide, he also says, kill the messenger is a cautionary tale. It's like the words dangerous words. It's a cautionary tale, but for crusading journalists, keeping themselves safe from Gary Webb's fate may be easier said than done. Keeping yourself from shooting yourself in the head twice, you would think it wouldn't be too hard to keep yourself from shooting yourself in the head 2 times. But so obviously, again, this is ironic, right? That to say that this is dangerous, to say that it's a cautionary tale, it's a warning to journalists, be careful you don't tell the truth about the CIA, right? He just said, Webb told the truth, but be careful. That should be a cautionary tale, because if you tell the truth about the CIA, you might end up committing suicide by shooting yourself in the head twice. And my point is that the New Yorker and the LA Times both had these powerful, I think, reviews that were so the opposite of what either of those magazines ever does in terms of coming within 100 miles of the truth about a conspiracy. Here, they're both running right up and at least stomping on it with their ironic feet, saying, Gary Webb got killed by the CIA. Next slide, please.
Yeah, John, you're saying that the explosion of the gun would kill you before the bullet does?
That's what an expert in firearms told me. She was a lawyer. I think
that's going to become really important later on in the presentation. So I'm just not going to blow it.
Okay. All right. Movie review. Kill the messenger.
Sorry, John, I just wanted to make a small correction real quick. It was Slumber-J where Raphael Cruz had worked, okay? It wasn't Alberton, okay? I just wanted to make
all right.
Slumber-J.
But so here's the Huffington Post, and I don't know if anybody here reads the Huffington Post. I hate the Huffington Post. They make me nauseous. Typically, when I find something from them, they're disgustingly, I think, sellouts on almost every score. Next slide. He ended up committing suicide with 2 shots to his brain. Suicide? How could he pull the trigger twice after he had shot himself once in the brain? Now, so here you have 3 reviews where the reporters, I mean, the LA Times never did anything but attack the hell out of Gary Webb. And I think according to the guy who wrote the LA Times review, the reason they attacked Webb is because they were being cautious and they didn't want to shoot themselves. And so
John, bear in mind, the CIA has infiltrated every newsroom and every network in the country.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
William Colby told us that the agency owns everyone of significance in the mass media.
Yes, I don't think the word is infiltrated. They run them.
They own it.
Yes, right? It's from the top down. If anybody who gets anywhere, anybody who doesn't lie their asses off 7 days a week or tell the truth and end up shooting themselves in the head is a CIA operative. But my point is that you have these 3 sources that never tell the truth, that never come within 100 miles of telling the truth. The guy at the LA Times sticks a knife in the throat of not to the throat, but in the throat of the editors at the LA Times. And how do you account for this? And I was thinking, well, maybe because these guys are movie reviewers, they're not as attuned to the threats that are posed by news reporters if they tell the truth. And there may be an element of that, but on the other hand, they're writing reviews in which they're talking about this reporter who got killed with 2 shots to the head. So how could they have missed the inherent threat in saying anything positive about Gary Webb? It seems to me that they had to have been aware of the danger of saying what they said, and they said it anyway. And how could they have done that? And my answer to that is they were inspired by the movie. They were inspired by the just amazing courage and brilliance of Gary Webb. And they said, geez, we have to not be We have to be people. We have to be human beings. We have to stand up a little bit for truth and justice, that they were moved from the grave. They were moved by Gary Webb to do the right thing. And I think that that's so brilliant and so wonderful. And piss on Jim DiEugenio. Next slide. Because that ain't him, right? That's just more from the Huffington Post. Did he expose two powerful forces to go on living, right? You can see the irony in that. That doesn't compute, except ironically, that exposing forces would make you want to stop living. No, but it would move those powerful forces to murder you.
Make you stop living.
Next slide, please. Consortium News, Jim DiEugenio. So, all right, that's just to show you
John, what's he doing writing for Consortium News?
No stuff. It is such a dark spot. It's such a blemish on Robert Perry that he would be promoting Jim DiEugenio, and I can't answer that question other than to say apparently Perry's not. Certainly Perry is infiltrated. That's what I think, is that, Perry's not a young guy, and, look, you have taken on Gary King to assist you in doing your stuff. Well, Robert Perry has taken on Lisa Pease and Jim DiEugenio to assist him in doing his stuff. And Jim DiEugenio and Lisa Pease have such good credentials. They were so important to the writing of JFK and the Unspeakable that they must be trustworthy, mustn't they? No, these guys are deep operatives. Next slide, please. Just next slide. In this quote, DiEugenio says, he's talking about Freeway Ricky Ross, who was the largest drug dealer in LA by many, many times, and whose trial came to Gary Webb's attention. And in the process of paying attention to that, it became very, very clear that Ricky Ross was getting all of his cocaine from CIA operatives. And Eugenio throws this in. He was nicknamed Freeway Rick because he made so much money selling drugs that he purchased properties along the Harbor Freeway, including motels and theaters. Ricky Ross has spoken to my students at Manual Arts High School 4 times. He's spoken to many hundreds of students. It hasn't gotten me in good. It didn't get me in good with the administrators there, and I ended up retiring because I wanted to do this kind of research full time rather than fight those guys.
Because you didn't want to shoot yourself twice in the head?
I'm still working on that one. Anyway, but my point is, where did DiEugenio come up with this crap? He just made it up. Ricky Ross is very well known to me, right? And he and I have spoken for hundreds of hours probably. And I know friends of his and so on. Anyway, the point is, Ricky Ross told me that they called him Freeway Rick when he was a little kid because his house was right next to the freeway. They widened the freeway, knocked down the house, and this is 10 years later, he becomes a drug dealer, but in the neighborhood, he was still Freeway Rick because that's what his name was, right? If your name is Lil Hankey Loke, because when Big Hankey Loke is Big Hankey Loke, and so you're Lil, when you're 30, you're still Lil Hankey Loke because that was your name, right? It's your moniker, and you carry it with you. Your placa in Spanish, they would say it, right? Anyway, the point that I want to make as quickly as possible is that here we're confronted with Eugenio just making stuff up. Why would he bother to make it up? And I guess the answer, it's not a bad question, but one, you have to be confronted by the fact that he makes stuff up apparently. And secondly, he's making it up in order to sound credible, like he knows the subject that he's talking about. Anyway, next slide. And I'm going to go through this quickly because it makes me sick to my stomach to talk about it.
Yeah, but we have the time.
I know, but we can talk about something else when we're done. DiEugenio in the same review, and I just wrote it up on a slide because it was easy to see, said that in describing Gary Webb's death, the first shot only wounded him, so he fired again. And this is in the Consortium News. Let me add. Now, there was no investigation, zero. They didn't bother to look around the room to see where the bullets entered and exited. Where did they go? We don't know because there was zero investigation. There was no autopsy. Where does he come up with this crap?
Lisa Pease knew, though.
But next slide, please. On the Consortium, they've taken this down. on the this response on the consortium website, there was a post from a guy who called himself Working Hard, and he asked Eugenio, he said, man, Jim, I have so much respect for you. Why are you pandering to the suicide conclusion? And I can tell you that, I went to the theater and watched it. I watched Kill the Messenger. Everybody in that theater was, angry and moved that, you weren't going to find anybody who didn't think that Gary Webb was murdered. They set it up. They wanted you to think that. They show all of these threats. He's getting threatened. He's getting threatened. He's getting threatened. You see a guy show up in his room at night and you think, all right, here they are. They're going to shoot him in the head twice. And they don't. It's a CIA guy who came to confess and he didn't know who else to tell. So he woke Gary Webb up in the middle of the night to tell him anyway. So that and then the last thing that you see on the screen is this black screen with these white letters saying that Gary Webb was found with 2 bullets in the head and it was ruled as suicide. And everybody, you can hear the gasp in the crowd. Suicide? What the hell are you talking about? But I'll throw in quickly that when this happened, I'm going to make it a long story short. I contacted everybody I could find to say, look, we got to do something about this. And nobody was doing anything. And somebody I talked to was able to give me the phone number of Cyril Wecht, and I called Cyril Wecht, and he agreed to do the autopsy for half his usual fee. And he told me that of 35,000 autopsies he had done, he had never seen a 2-headshot suicide. He was very interested. And he also explained to me that you could very easily in an autopsy determine whether somebody was dead when they're shot by a bullet, because when you're alive, your veins are very inflated. It's like telling the difference between a balloon that was shot with a bullet when it was inflated and a balloon that was shot with a bullet when it was deflated, he said. It's very easy. Anyway, so Eugenio gets confronted by one of his fans who says that he's pandering, and he doesn't respond. Lisa Pease responds, which is rather weird, don't you think? And it makes me think that perhaps Pease wrote the thing in the first place and just put Eugenio's name on it. Anyway, Pease responds, the first shot through his mouth, exited his cheek, no serious damage done. The second shot was at a higher angle and entered his brain, killing him instantly.
Wait, hold on there, John. Didn't you tell me that you die from just the explosion alone?
Yes, you would die from the explosion alone. If you put the gun in your mouth, there's no freaking way that you would not get. I mean, if you stick the gun in your mouth, it's aimed at your medulla oblongata, your brain stem, which controls your breathing and heartbeat. Right? It's very effective. Right? You could do it with a blank.
So Lisa P said it went through his cheek, huh?
Which is very, 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 very interesting. You'll see that in a second. Next slide, please. And Working Hard responds, your account of the trajectory of the first bullet conflicts with all other reports of his death I have seen. Please provide some references. And Lisa P's response, next slide, should have been the killers told me. Well, she doesn't respond. That was it. They shut it down and then they erased Working Hard, and I don't know who else is. But I just Googled, right, the words that I had copied down off the screen. I Googled them and they don't show up anywhere anymore. But they used to take you to the Consortium News website. Anyway, if Lisa Pease didn't get it from the killers, she just made it up. But either answer, if you say, oh, she just made it up, well, why the hell would she make up a story to say that Gary Webb didn't commit suicide when he's so clearly obvious? I'm sorry, to say that Gary Webb did commit suicide. Why would you bother to make up a story like that? And I think, next slide, please. The answer is that she got it from the killers. Now, I hired an investigator, and I have real qualms about putting this slide up because Gary Webb deserves some privacy, doesn't he? And as Cyril Wecht explained to me, no, he doesn't. That when somebody is murdered, the coroner doesn't give a crap if the family wants the body cremated. If a guy has killed himself with 2 shots to the head, the coroner doesn't give a damn. They want to do an autopsy, and they also want to see who's the beneficiary on his insurance. And if the family wants to insist that the body should be cremated, that's only going to arouse suspicion that the family was involved in what was obviously a murder. How about you see there that the bullet exited Gary's cheek? How the hell did Lisa Pease know that the bullet exited Gary's cheek? Now, I hired an investigator who went to the morgue and ran into the family and told the family, his ex-wife and his sons, what he was up to, and the wife signed a thing giving us permission to do the autopsy, and then walked him in and allowed him to examine the body, and he took this photograph. Lisa Pease didn't do that. Where did she come up with this other than that the killers told her that? Well, I would invite Lisa Pease to answer that freaking question. I say that she got it from the killers, that she's involved with the killers. I don't think that this necessarily indicts Jim DiEugenio for being anything but a stupid idiot that he would listen to Lisa Pease and a non-professional investigator that he won't engage in debate with people because they disagree with him. Shove it, Jim.
Well, looking at these wounds, John, neither of them looks to me like an exit wound. They both look to me like they could be entrance wounds. What do you think, Larry?
Yeah, that's exactly what JFK's front throat wound looked like.
I hear you both. My investigator said he couldn't find; those were the only two wounds he could find. He examined his body carefully, and he thought that the bullets must have been fired into his ear, his ear on the opposite side of his head.
So the below the cross, the lower thing, there are a whole lot of little marks there on the face that would be from the residue from the gunpowder hitting the face. In other words, that was virtually right. The gun was put up right next to his face.
Depending on the distance.
Yeah, it could be calculated, right?
Well, okay, there should be burns, all right? Who knows, right? And I'll just say,
burns like RFK.
Oh, right, and the powder would be embedded so that it wouldn't clean up. Now, it doesn't look like an exit wound. You would think an exit wound would be 4 inches wide. So right. I don't know.
Looks like it was more of at a distance, John. Actually, I would say
that's an interesting observation. The point is, you have to do an autopsy, don't you? Right? If the gun was held far enough away that it didn't leave powder burns, it clearly wasn't held by Gary, which is why
we're almost out of time. But are you telling me that no autopsy was done on Gary?
No, you're looking at it. That body. This is 5 days after Gary was murdered. No autopsy.
Wow.
No, which is why Mr. Wecht was willing to do it, and why he was willing to do it for $5,000 instead of $10,000.
But what happened? How did that become aborted?
Mike Rupert and a bunch of other police agents descended upon the family and said, "You better burn the damn body." And the family said, "Oh shit, yeah,
burn
okay."
the body.
They cremated it. And
wait a minute. Why would they?
No, let me talk. Gary's wife, because we're running out of time. Gary's wife called me up to apologize. And she said, I told you could do an autopsy, but we cremated the body, and I'm really sorry that we did that without asking or telling her, and so on. And I said, lady, you don't have to apologize. I totally get it. The life is for the living. You felt threatened, and so you did it. And in any case, if Wecht had done the autopsy, all that he could have told us was that Gary was murdered. He couldn't tell us who, but the fact that there was no autopsy and a 2-headshot suicide tells us who. We didn't need to do the autopsy. We know who killed him. Somebody killed him who could tell the coroner, no, you're not doing an autopsy.
It's called motive means an opportunity, John, needless to say.
Well, and demonstration of power, right? I mean, when Kennedy's body gets stolen, somebody who had the power to steal Kennedy's body had to have been involved. It wasn't the mafia, because they didn't have the power to steal Kennedy's body. It wasn't the Russians or the Cubans, because they didn't have the power to steal Kennedy's body. And the fact that Gary didn't get an autopsy tells you it was people who had the power to call up the coroner and say, nope, no autopsy necessary.
John, it was super having you here. We'll have to have you back. Gary, take us out.
Yeah, we didn't scratch the surface here, Jim, at all with this guy.
Yeah. All right. We could continue on another show. All right. This has been JFK number 104. And we appreciate John Hankey about this Gary Webb information. And we'll see everyone next week. We appreciate Chance George and the engineer's chair, Larry Rivera, Dr. Fetzer, myself, and especially tonight. And we're looking forward to having Don Fox back pretty soon. And thank you again, John.
Thank you all for the opportunity. I really enjoyed talking to you. Have a great evening and a great life. See y'all later.
Don't go, John. Don't go.
Okay. All right.